The Iran-backed Islamic resistance in Iraq has claimed responsibility for a drone attack on an army base in the northern Golan Heights that killed 2 Israeli soldiers and injured 24 others. The Israel Defense Force is saying 2 drones were fired, but one of them was shot down by air defenses. Sirens reportedly sounded for the first drone, but not the second, so the soldiers on the base did not have time to get to a shelter. There's a lot to discuss about this and other topics there in the Middle East, so I do want to bring in Ambassador Gerald Feierstein, the director of the Middle East Institute's Arabian Peninsula Affairs Program, and a distinguished senior fellow on U.S. diplomacy. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to be here with us and break it all down.
Good to be with you this morning, Josh.
All right, so my first question here, I do want to talk a little bit about the Islamic resistance in Iraq there. We know that Iraq, that is where the drones were fired at that army base. 2 IDF soldiers killed, 24 at least wounded as a result. So can you explain who the Islamic resistance of Iraq is and really how they're connected to Iran?
Well, these are a group. It's the Islamic resistance is an umbrella term that's used for a number of pro-Iranian militias, Shia, that were really established over the course of the last decade or so, initially to fight against the Islamic State, if you remember, and then they have continued and are playing a major role in terms of destabilizing the situation inside of Iraq. They've also been responsible for a number of attacks against U.S. military facilities in Iraq and in northern Syria.
We think of places like Gaza, Lebanon as places where missiles are being fired at Israel, but are there a lot of attacks there that are actually coming out of places like Iraq?
Well, increasingly, of course, we've seen that other pro-Iranian groups have been trying to strike at Israel. The most notable one, of course, are the Houthis in Yemen, who have been attacking shipping in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb for almost a year now, but have also tried on several occasions to launch missiles or drones at Israeli targets, and a couple of times they've managed to get through and actually hit a target. They caused casualties in Tel Aviv a couple of months ago. So they're the most notable ones, but certainly this umbrella array of pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria are also engaged.
And what you're looking at on your screen right now is a live look over Beirut, Lebanon. We do know that that ground operation by Israel is underway. Iran's supreme leader urging nations from Afghanistan to Yemen, Iran to Gaza to be ready to attack Israel. Who do the countries around Israel side with in this conflict? Are they pretty much siding with Iran? Do a few of them side with Israel? Do some of them try to basically be in the middle?
Well, the country that's most directly involved and most directly vulnerable, of course, is Jordan. The Jordanians have been very clearly supportive of Israel. They have participated in the defense of Israel the 2 times that Iran launched missiles against Israeli targets. Beyond that, of course, the Gulf states are incredibly important, and they have more or less taken a neutral position. Their goal, their hope is that the situation will de-escalate. They don't want to be drawn into a conflict between Iran and Israel, and therefore they're hoping and counseling moderation on both sides. Beyond that, of course, Egypt very much engaged in negotiations with the Israelis and Hamas to bring the Gaza conflict to an end, and elsewhere in the region, mostly neutral.
We've heard from President Biden. He's been asked a lot of questions about whether Israel should respond to the attack by Iran that happened on Tuesday. We're talking 181 ballistic missiles that were fired there at Israel. And Biden has said that Israel does have a right to respond, but they should do it proportionally. Do we know what that really means when you talk about a proportional attack to what we saw from Iran?
Well, I think that there are a number of different factors. Of course, the most important thing about the Iranian attack, and like the attack that they launched in April, is that there were no casualties on the Israeli side, and also that the Iranians seem to be targeting primarily military facilities. So I think when you're talking about proportionate, you would be talking about something that conceivably would avoid civilian targets, avoid civilian casualties, and not target economic or core infrastructure, but perhaps to focus on military targets. If you could do that, then perhaps you have the opportunity to try to de-escalate and make this the last round between the two sides.
Do you think that Israel would consider attacking Iran on October 7th? We know that is the one-year anniversary, so to speak, of the attack by Hamas on Israel that killed 1,200 people, more than 250 hostages taken. It's been tossed around mostly on social media via experts that October 7th would be, they say, quote unquote, the perfect day. So is that fairly likely to happen?
Well, I think that the Israelis are going to want to maintain operational secrecy. They're not going to want to advertise when they're going to strike. October 7th is certainly plausible. Keeping in mind, this is the high holiday season in Israel. We've just had Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, a few days ago. The end of this week is Yom Kippur, the most religiously observant and important day on the Jewish calendar. And so between those two dates, you do have a window of opportunity where if the Israelis wanted to do something, they would be able to do it.
We heard from Jordan's foreign minister saying that Jordan will, quote, defend itself with all its capabilities if any missiles and weapons are flying overhead. So is that a threat, in your opinion, to both Iran and Israel?
Yes, although it's probably not likely that that any Israeli missiles would threaten the Jordanian airspace. They would fly over, but not likely to hit anything in Jordan. But the Jordanians again are trying to maintain a degree of separation. They've been supportive of Israel. But they also have to keep in mind that the Jordanian population is strongly pro-Palestinian. Of course, you have a very high percentage of Jordanians who trace their roots back to Palestine, and therefore they don't want to be too forward-leaning and doing something that might be perceived as being against Palestinian interests.
I want to get your take on this because we've seen a lot of the Hezbollah leadership taken out over the past several weeks, including Hassan Nasrallah, the leader there of Hezbollah, and then several people who were expected to kind of take over for him after. So how exactly is Hezbollah still launching all of these missiles over at northern Israel if their leadership is kind of gone? Are they more disorganized, or do they still have other folks that are maybe lower down and are taking control?
I think in all of these groups, there's a certain level of decentralization that you have people who are charged with and capable of taking the initiative on their own. Certainly, the loss of Nasrallah is a major blow, but the organization is still there, and presumably, I think the intelligence analysts are saying that perhaps the Israelis have succeeded in destroying about 50% of the Hezbollah arsenal, but the other 50% is still very potent and very possible for an attack against the Israelis. Also, I think, to the extent that the Israelis are focusing on ground operations, this is something that Hezbollah is very experienced with. I think you have a lot of very experienced commanders particularly those who've been fighting in Syria for the last more than 10 years, who've gotten a lot of operational, experience. And they're going to be able to form a pretty formidable front against Israel.
Ambassador, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break down all those developments coming in out of the Middle East. Anything else you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Well, I think, a lot still depends on the U.S. along with our partners, the Egyptians and the Qataris, to try to make some progress on ending the conflict in Gaza. I still think, despite what's happening in South Lebanon, that's the key to reducing tensions in the region.
All right, Ambassador, thank you again for being here with us today. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Josh.